messaged me to say he is going to be recording this afternoon's session. We have BSL interpretation for the second part of our meeting. So for those of you who do not wish to be recorded, you don't have to give your name, and we'll make sure that it's not added to the YouTube footage. Right, I'm going to hand over to Ellen Clifford. Hope Ellen's online, and she is going to be giving a presentation over where we are with the campaign, and showing some slides that she wants to present to all of you before we open up to the floor. So Ellen, I hope you're online.
Yep, I'm here, Paula.
Brilliant.
I'm just gonna share my screen if I can.
All right, so I'll hand over the meeting to you. Thank you.
And put this on slideshow. Okay, can people see the slides? Yeah. Cool. I've got the thing on the side. All right, there we are. Okay, so first of all, I want to apologize that I haven't put any pictures in the slides yet. I was up preparing for the meeting tomorrow. I will put pictures in the slides and then circulate them to people who attended today. So choice at the end of life assisted suicide bill. So we call it assisted suicide. It's also known as assisted dying. And the difference between that and euthanasia is that with assisted suicide, the person has to take the lethal dose themselves, whereas with euthanasia, that's administered by a physician, usually through an injection. So I just wanted to explain the terms. And what I'm going to go through is to explain about the bill and where it's up to. And a lot of people may already know that. So apologies if I'm going over things you already know, but I want to be clear to everyone. And to explain the steps that we've already put into process for campaigning against the bill. I'm calling this a strategy that's on behalf of the UK coalition, and who that refers to is the group of organisations, group of deaf and disabled people's organisations from across the UK who have been working together to monitor the Convention on the Rights of Disabled People and how far that's been or hasn't been implemented in the UK by the government. And we've been reporting back to the United Nations for several years now. Our official name is the UK Deaf and Disabled People's Organisations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People's Monitoring Coalition, UK DDPOCRDP Monitoring Coalition, which is a mouthful, so we just call it the UK Coalition. DPAC is a key member and we oversee the administration of the coalition. We've been advised by allies that we're working with on this campaign that if it's the coalition that's leading on our campaign strategy, that's a real strength, because it shows to parliamentarians the strength of feeling that there is on this issue. None of the organisations involved in the coalition are in favour of assisted suicide. We have a joint position on that, and that is a strength to make sure that parliamentarians know that. So about the bill. So this bill is a private member's bill, and private members' bills are different from laws that the government brings in. There's less time for discussion and scrutiny by parliamentarians of private members' bill, and there isn't space to take opinions from external experts in PMBs, as they're referred to. So one of our arguments is that this is a really unsuitable way to be bringing in legislation of this magnitude. This legislation represents a fundamental change in society and the way that the state intervenes in the lives of its citizens, and a fundamental change in the role of the doctor. So we don't think that a private member's bill is in any way suitable. How private members' bills come in is at the start of each parliament. So after a general election, names are drawn in a ballot, and the MPs who come out top get to choose a bill that they would like to try and get through Parliament. Kim Leadbeater won the MP's ballot, and she chose, for what she wanted to bring in was to try and legalise assisted suicide. The private members' bills from the MPs that come out at the ballot, they go in order through Parliament. So if you come out first, the idea is that your bill goes through as far as it can, and once it's blocked or it gets through, then the MP who was next gets a go at it, and so on. It's quite rare for private members' bills to pass and to get made into legislation, but it does happen. It does happen. One example is Senni's law, which Steve Reed brought in, which was about police wearing body cameras when dealing with people with mental distress. So it can happen. So there is a danger here. Lord Falconer, who was in Liz's documentary that we just saw, he came second in the Lords ballot. So the MPs have a ballot and the Lords have a ballot, and they both get to introduce private members' bills. Falconer had already tried to get a private members' bill passed to legalise assisted suicide in 2015, and that got blocked and stopped. There have been many attempts to try and bring in assisted suicide through private members' bills, but also through legal challenges, and it's people will have seen it as an issue that's in the media constantly, and that's because the campaign that is in favour of legalisation is very, very well resourced. They have a lot of people with a lot of money involved, so they can constantly be lobbying politicians and looking for ways to build popular support in favour of what they want. Falconer called his bill the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Bill. Yeah, Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Bill. And it is significant that there is a difference in the name between his and between with Kim Leadbetter's bill. He's clearly setting the fact that the parameters would be only for terminally ill adults, whereas her title has scope to be widened further. We think that the text of her bill will be similar to his, but she's giving an indication to those who are in favour of it that it could be widened and that she supports that idea. There was an article in the Telegraph last week or the week before about a group of, I think, 38 MPs who have already been lobbying her because they don't want the bill just to apply to those who are terminally ill, but also they want it to apply to people who are, in their words, incurably suffering, which would take it much, much wider. Now, Falconer's now withdrawn his bill because Leadbeater won her ballot, so that's going through first. So he's stopping his in order to work with her on hers. Additionally, prime ministers choose not to take party lines on votes on assisted suicide. The issue has always been treated as a matter of conscience, and MPs are given a free vote. Officially, Leadbeater's bill is being treated the same, the head of the civil service sent out a letter to government ministers that was published saying clearly this is a matter of conscience for MPs to vote on. However, the Prime Minister has made public his very strong commitment to getting assisted suicide legalised when he was Director of Prosecutions, he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. He brought in guidelines to make it less likely that people supporting their loved ones either to go to Dignitas or to take their own lives in this country would be prosecuted. And he's always been quite public about favouring legalisation. There's also been lots of media stories talking about his personal promise to Esther Rantzen that this would be legalised for. So this really doesn't feel like the same kind of free vote that MPs have had in the past. We've been advised that we shouldn't make too much of this because it might get the backs up of Labour MPs who we definitely need to be voting the way we want them to, but it's definitely an issue of major concern. There are lots of new Labour MPs in Parliament now who are still finding their feet and learning how Parliament works. So, that's an additional concern for this coming in so quickly. The bill was introduced to Parliament on the 16th of October. When a bill's introduced, the first reading, that's when you find out the name of the bill. And that's basically all you find out at that stage. As I've said, we're expecting the text of the bill to be similar to Lord Falconer's, but we're not going to see that yet. Hopefully, we will have it by the second reading. Officially, it needs to be published by the end of the second reading if it passes. The second reading is going to take place on the 29th of November. The second reading is when MPs have a chance to discuss the principles of the bill, and they will vote on it at the end of that discussion. At Prime Minister's questions on the 9th of October, Starmer was asked by the Conservative politician David Davies if he was committed to giving enough time for discussion of the bill, and Starmer said yes, he would make sure there was enough time for discussion. I think Davis asked for 2 days, so we're going to have to see whether that time is allowed. Davis is actually in favour of legalisation, but he feels very strongly that there needs to be enough time for scrutiny. So when we're trying to get politicians and parliamentarians to vote against this bill, it might not just be on the case that they don't agree with legalisation, but that this is not the way to do it. If the bill passes the second reading, it would then go to committee stage where MPs can put forward possible amendments, which are then voted on by a cross-party group of MPs. The Lords would also need to vote in favour for it to be passed into legislation. If they don't, we've seen this in the past where the Lords vote against something. We had that with the welfare reform and work bill in 2016, I think it was, and it kept going back and forth, which is called ping pong, until eventually the Lords conceded. I think the Commons pulled what they call financial privilege at that time, but really legislation can't be stopped by the Lords if the Commons want it to go through generally. The tone of the debate. So traditionally it's been very emotive and quite confrontational, or people who are in favour of legalisation will talk very much about their own suffering. There are lots of very emotive stories of extreme pain and distress that are put in the media and definitely shape people's views on the issue. And then for us, it's extremely painful to talk about as well, because we're talking well, we're talking to the people who are in favour are devaluing our lives, essentially. They're denying our right to exist in many ways, and it's incredibly personal for us as well. But in going forward with campaigning against this at this time, we need to win over MPs who are skeptical and or are open to rational evidence-based discussion. And again, we've been advised by people who do a lot of very serious lobbying for a profession that we need to not be as emotive as the other side. It's just very difficult when issue is so dangerous and personal as this, but that we need to look as if we are that we are the side with uh with the facts, and we are, so we can do that. It's just difficult, I think. As a disabled activist, I am much more comfortable doing outsider campaigning because I personally doubt Parliament's ability to ever provide full equality and inclusion for deaf and disabled people. However, at this moment in time, where we are is that the future lives of disabled people in this country do rest on those votes. And so it is a case of insider campaigning and lobbying. We've been advised that we need to go in with an approach that is respectful and compassionate to the other side, at least publicly anyway. So the key arguments that we've been putting forward so far are that there needs to be adequate safeguards against abuse and against the eligibility being widened to include more and more groups of people, the so-called slippery slope that we have seen in every other place where legalization has occurred. Oregon is often cited by the other side as an example of where that hasn't happened, but actually it has. So the text of the legislation may not have changed, but the definition of what counts as terminal illness has grown to include more groups, for example, people with anorexia. So I think our fundamental question is whether you can ever put in enough safeguards for legalization to be safe, and we would say you can't, but making sure that MPs are not going to vote in favor, even if they are in favor of the principle, if they can see that there aren't enough safeguards in this particular piece of legislation. Other key argument is that there isn't enough space for scrutiny, that for something of this magnitude, there needs to be at least an independent commission before any attempts at legalization. There was a report that came out of an inquiry that the Health and Social Care Select Committee held into the question of assisted suicide. They held that in 2023, but that was a group of MPs. It was limited in its scope, and in no way does that provide an adequate basis for legalization. What they were attempting to do was just to look at issues as an aid for future discussion and debate, not for legalization. And as I've said earlier, private members' bill is just the most inappropriate way to do this. There's just not enough space for real scrutiny. And our third key argument is one which we've been using for years to take a bit of Starmer's rhetoric. We're saying fix the foundations first. That is not real choice that's being presented. It's called the choice at the end of life bill, but there isn't choice. If you don't have adequate palliative care support, if there aren't sufficient medical resources for people not to have to endure avoidable pain, then this is not a choice at the end of life if people don't have adequate social care or mental health support. So that's our kind of third argument that we've been using so far. So the strategy, this is a brief summary of it to move on to other people's thoughts. I think we've been trying to map all the other groups who are also wanting to or have started some campaigning against this bill. Everyone seems a bit uncoordinated at the moment, so trying to pull people together so we can work together, don't duplicate, share resources. We sent out a briefing to MPs on the 16th of October, which is available on the Disabled People Against Cuts website. That went to all 650 MPs, and it also gives a list of additional resources that people can use for further reading, and also the references in the footnotes provide things that people can read on that. I have heard back from a few MPs, and interestingly, it's the MPs who are known to have a position that's against assisted suicide who've actually written to say thank you for it, which I think is interesting and shows that they are aware of the need to at least appear compassionate for our views as well. Not Dead Yet have done a template letter to send to MPs, and we're also going to be encouraging people to send that out along with the briefing paper, because although it was sent out to all MPs get so much correspondence. I've already heard from other MPs who've been looking around for information about this, asking where they can read things and wanting a copy of the briefing, but they've already been sent it. But that's the nature of Parliament, and just means it's not a problem if they receive it a few times. I think what is heartening is that before our briefing was sent out, I was hearing last week and the beginning of this work that MPs were desperately trying to find something that put our position across, the position against legalisation. So that's why we work very hard to try and get that out as soon as possible. We're now trying to organise events for MPs, so including a screening of Liz's documentary that will have a panel for questions and answers after it, a drop-in for MPs to meet people with terminal and progressive conditions who are opposed to assisted suicide. Quite often, one of the arguments put forward by those in favour is that disabled people don't represent the people who are disabled who want it. They say we're not representative, that we don't count, our voices don't count, essentially. I am aware, I haven't listened to it. I'd rather not listen to it, just hear about it from others. There was a podcast with Polly Toynbee, who's always been in favour, I think last week, and she was very disparaging about Tanni Gray-Thompson being able to have a say on this issue. She dismissed her as the fittest person that she knew. So I think it's important for people who are involved in our campaign, who are in that situation, to give their reasons to MPs, so they can see that actually there are there are two different views on this from people in those actual situations. On the panel and in the drop-ins, we want to have palliative care and medical professionals. We're in touch with a number of those who are opposed to it. And we're also in touch with campaigners and those with experience of how assisted suicide and euthanasia are being carried out in other places where it is legal, and who are warning against it. We've begun our media strategy. We want to raise awareness of arguments that the public and politicians might not know. I mentioned Oregon is always being used by the other side as an example where the slippery slope hasn't happened. We know it has, so we can evidence that. In Oregon, They come out at the end of every year with a data summary. I think it's dying with dignity data summary, something like that. But they give the percentages of those who have been assisted to commit suicide that year, percentages of those who have scored different reasons that are their concerns for wanting to end their lives. And pain generally comes out at about only 1/3 of those. The highest scoring reasons are always loss of autonomy and not being able to do the same activities that people did before that they enjoyed. Um, Financial concerns has actually been rising steadily over the last few years as well. But I think the public and MPs who hadn't come across this debate before, they always think it's about pain. It's about stopping people from being in terrible pain, and who can argue with that. So it's about being able to expose that this is about much more than that. That's not the central reason why that's happening. We also want to get in the media stories from other places where it's legal. One MP that I spoke to said it's stories that will win the day. So being able to show in a way that captures the hearts and minds of parliamentarians, um, the real cases of abuse that have happened and continue to happen in places where it's legal. Um, Social media strategy isn't something that I've been involved in discussions around. It's not my forte, but my idea would be maybe taking some of the key statistics, like the pain one, Oregon pain one, out of the briefing, and maybe getting some social media going on those. And there have also been discussions about having a presence outside Parliament during the second reading on the 29th of November, so that we're visible as well. So those are the key things that we sort of come up with before, and the idea of today is to do this all together and get everyone's ideas. But I think one of the key things that I know has already been mentioned, I know Paula and Dennis are really hot on this, which is fantastic, because self-care during this is so important. It's such an upsetting topic to have to talk about, especially at the same time, as Paula was saying, we're fighting further disability benefit cuts and demonisation by the government. It's really, really upsetting times. So I would advise, everyone should only do what you feel comfortable with and that you can take part in. Like I said, I'm not going to listen to that podcast with Polly Toyn, because that will really upset me and stop me from actually being able to do the things that I know I can do and share with people. So just sending love and solidarity at this time to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can I ask all of you to put yourselves on mute and have only one? Thank you. Right. Thank you very much, Ellen, for really concise and clear overview of where we are at with the campaign. So now I'm going to open it up to the floor. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand or your hand emoji. And I'm going to ask the awesome DPAC tech team, who are working hard in the background to assist me, so I get the questions in the order that you yourselves want to be heard. So who would like to go first?
Paula, we've got Deborah King, then Fiona Robertson first, then Dyra Emma Hopwood. If you want to take those three.
Yes, please. So Deborah, would you like to go ahead? Unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. I read the DPAC briefing note, and Nathan Lee Davis's situation is one that we have to be able to show the Treasury that we've got solutions to, rather than the Chancellor simply cutting social security and bringing in this. The reality is this is all about some people wanting control over their own lives, but not wanting disabled people to have control over their own lives for all the period of time leading up to their death. And the Treasury has to meet major manifesto commitments. For example, to solve the NHS and social care crisis, build houses, retrofit others. And it didn't include the Disability Convention in the manifesto, but it did include the socio-economic duty and said it would amend the Equality Act 2010. This means there's scope for judicial review down the line. One thing I would encourage people to think about is trying to get GCSE into the national curriculum. I've drafted 2 sides of A4, which you can get from Disability Politics UK if you go to the contact section. But if it was introduced as a mandatory part of the national curriculum, it could enable more people to feel able to consider social care as an option. It could ensure fewer people needed to go to their GP, thus reducing some of the political pressure on GPs and accident and emergency waiting times. And it could help working class children and young people consider medicine and professions allied to medicine as a career. Dr. Onka Sahota, who used to be our Greater London Assembly member, supports the concept. So does John McDonnell, the independent MP for Hayes and Harlington. And I just think that might help solve some of the problems that Nathan Lee Davis referred to in the briefing note has. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Appreciate that. Fiona Robinson, over to you.
Hi everyone. I'll try and keep it as concise as I can, but I've got obviously got a lot of thoughts about this and how to counter it. I'm up in Scotland, so this bill is has a slightly different effect on us, but we've been our Parliament has essentially said that they're kind of waiting to see what England and Wales do, and then we'll make a decision about the one that's been introduced in our Parliament. So it seems like they're inextricably linked. I think that there's I used to be in favor of assisted suicide. For many years I was, and even when I first became disabled, possibly especially when I first became disabled, if this had been available to me in those first 3 years, I have no shadow of a doubt that I would have taken that option. And luckily it wasn't available to me. And luckily I met other disabled people eventually who taught me about disability politics and disability justice in particular. And I think that there's a number of ways that we can approach the argument, because for so many people who are on the pro side, they genuinely feel like they're doing the right thing. They genuinely feel like this is the good left-wing humanitarian position to hold. And I think that there are ways that we can counter it that are the only counter they've typically heard is the religious one, particularly up here. And so kind of countering it from the disabled people's side is really important. And the one of the ones that I've been using a lot recently in discussions is, it came up in Liz's video, is that when we talk about safeguards, when we talk about doctors being able to make these judgments and being in charge of this, that it won't be the state making the decision, it'll be doctors. Kind of the thing that eventually changed my mind about all this was spending 20 years as a chronically ill person at the mercy of doctors and experiencing the way that they see disability and that they see people who aren't going to get better. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, when we talked about the risk to sick people and disabled people, we were told often that that we were being hysterical and that there was no conceivable risk, that there wouldn't be like doing DNRs, and they wouldn't be they wouldn't be triaging in a way that was discriminatory. And then, of course, all the news stories started coming out about the DNRs and the ways that ventilators were withheld on the off chance that a healthy person came in, not just in places where there was a choice between a disabled person and a healthy person, but places where they just kept them just in case someone who was able came in. And I think that that's been a kind of very visceral and recent example to a lot of people about how doctors do see disabled lives, about how, well, when we talk about safeguards, if they're the ones who are in charge of the safeguards, then they're not going to be what we would consider safeguards. And the other kind of big prong has been, again, as it came up in the documentary, this concept of dignity, like this idea of what it means to be dignified, and that so many people believe that dignity is bound up in your personal independence and not your autonomy, that you can make decisions about your own life. That's dignity, but it doesn't mean that you have to be able to do everything by yourself. And so, but that's a much bigger societal shift. So essentially, I think the argument that I've been making is that I do actually fundamentally agree with the idea that you should have control over your own life and that you should be able to make these decisions for yourself. But in this society, with this kind of scale of coercion that exists on a society-wide basis, then you don't need like your daughter-in-law telling you that you should go through assisted suicide, because you've got an entire society telling you that. You don't need like an individual putting pressure on you, because you've got everything that we have been raised to believe kind of pressing on how you shouldn't be a burden, and look at them giving up their lives to look after you, and look at how worried they are about you. And I've got friends who are part of the hearings in Canada, Gabrielle Peters in particular, who does a lot of work on, sorry, my cat's trying to attack my face. And she's been in a position where she has been asked repeatedly by doctors and nurses why she hasn't considered MAID. And that's something that is not supposed to happen. And I think we can all agree that that's where these safeguards, like, they fall down. This is always going to fall down, because it's always going to be down to individual doctors and nurses who will make those decisions. So sorry for going on so long, but yeah.
Thanks, Fiona. Right, Daria, over to you. You want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, yes. So there were three kind of potential arguments against that were discussed in the presentation. So arguing to MPs who are in favour that there are not enough safeguards, and that there needs to be an independent commission, and that we need to fix the foundations first. It occurs to me that I don't know whether those are good strategies in the short term, but in the long term, they're the kind of things that people can always argue that they've added safeguards, or that they've done an independent commission, or that they fixed the foundations. And we don't want our words now to be used against us then, and to kind of argue that, yes, they have jumped through the hoops. I think that stories are incredibly effective, and I'll tell you why I came to this side of the argument, the anti-assisted dying side. My nan would always talk about how she didn't want to be a burden. And she would talk about, she called it euthanasia. And I was horrified by this. I was horrified. I mean, she was in perfect health, and she died at the age of 99 in almost perfect health up to the end. But that's not really the point. I found it difficult to argue against her at the time, but because she'd absorbed all of these kind of attitudes from the media and society, that you shouldn't need to be a burden. And how do you argue against that to a loved one? You can. She wasn't that political. She wouldn't have responded to the kind of arguments that I would make to activist friends. So yeah. So that's why I'm against. But I think we do need to think about strategy in the long term, and for people sort of expressing sort of if they have, as the previous speaker said, if they had previously been in favor or neutral on assisted dying and have come to the realization it's a problem, explaining why is a very effective argument.
Thank you very much.
Chair, sorry, DPAC tech support doing an interpreter swap now. Great.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just to also just say quickly, for those of you who wish to be put in contact with the group Not Dead Yet UK, please leave your email contact details in the chat and we can forward them on. Right, Jay Robinson, believe you're next, and then it's Simone and then Andrew Clark. So Jay, over to you.
Sorry, you caught me in a bit of a predicament. As somebody who's had an end of life plan, death plan, whatever you want to call it, since 1984, and then having gone through what can only be described as the horrors that people endured during lockdown and COVID, where people were killed, for want of a better word, because they were disabled or very elderly, and doctors were going around dishing out DNRs like they were Smarties, because I know I had 2 doctors come up to me and say, we've put a DNR on your case studies. And I said, why is that? Because I'm disabled? And he said, no, it's because we're doctors and it's medical. And I just quoted a few articles out the Human Rights Act, told them under the Equalities Act I had protected status, so they better hurry on off and remove the DNR off my caseload, which they actually did. I'm only saying this because basically I think it's very important this isn't left down to doctors even, and especially not MPs, because they don't know what they're talking about. It's about personal value, and that doesn't change whether you are disabled or not. And it shouldn't matter if you're disabled or not. Everybody has value. Everybody has rights. And it's coming from that kind of perspective that even though I've got my own plan, I'm very much opposed to, very much, I think 99.999% of this assisted dying bill, what's being proposed, because there's a lack of safeguards, because there's a lack of genuine concern, and because it's just getting rid of people that they seem unsavoury. And that's taken us into 1930s Germany, pre the World War, when people were seen as uneconomically viable and shipped off to some clinic or back of a van to be gassed or experimented on, well, based and murdered. And I think we've got to really stop that happening in this country. And thank you very much. And thank you for the brilliant comments I've just heard. And to DPAC and Ellen and Paula, as per usual, you know, I think you're a brilliant speaker. But, you know, and Dennis and those that have already spoken, you know, brilliant points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. Appreciate that. Simone, over to you.
So well done. I don't know if you saw my thumbs up. Well done. I'm going to go straight into strategy ideas. So first, a couple of things I think we might need to focus on to make sure that we clearly distinguish ourselves from a religious lot. And that is really go hard on the UNCRPD. We absolutely I don't think all our briefings should really be starting, middle and end using the appropriate UNCRPD articles. I can't remember them all off by heart. 26 for right to healthcare, right to life is another one. So I think that would make us really clear that we are coming from a human rights perspective. I also think that we need to try and remind people about Harry Shipman. So we do have criminal legislation in place, but actually does not allow. So if one of you said, punch me in the face, even though we are two consenting adults, I'm not allowed to punch you in the face, even though you're consenting to that thing. There's a very good reason, because it's about avoiding exploitation, abuse of power between two individuals. That is already in law. And to me, that's exactly why you want that in law, because you're absolutely wanting to avoid the assisted dying stuff, because that's the kind of, you know, so therefore it goes against, I think, the principles of criminal legislation that you do not cause harm to another human being, even if that's what they want, quote, quote. So something I think we could consider is thinking about how do we might link that to actually the principles of criminal law anyway that are in place, but are there for a very, very, very good reason. And I'm quite happy to talk to anybody afterwards to do that. I also managed to get Sarah Sackman, who is the general solicitor for the government, right? I met her yesterday at our synagogue, and of course you might expect me to say, if you support a community, you might like to support disabled people's community against assisted dying. So she's up for a conversation with, I don't know, not dead yet, DPAC, whoever is, she wants to hear from disabled people. So I'm going to come back. I want to get back in touch with her to say that I can help organise that. She has advised me not to give out her telephone number, contact details. So we'll probably need to organise that. She is a government minister, so you might and she's a solicitor, so you absolutely might want to would like to offer to take that up, because I've already she's already offered that quite quickly to me. Liz's bill. I think my understanding, Ellen, is that a bill has to be published at second reading. You can't just debate principles without something published. So therefore, we would expect a bill to be published. I think it's 2 weeks or 2 weekends before you have to have 2 weekends before you have to give MPs. And that's a good point of saying we absolutely need those principles in easy read. That is their job to do, not dead yet, not DPAC, not people first, and certainly not my job. So we need to be pushing for those principles at least for principles of the bill in easy read, so we can explain to our community why we absolutely why we're against it. So those are the kind of ideas. I also quite like the idea, what I came up from the last speaker was, I think we should establish a peer support, a support network to help people to, if they are under threat of having a DNR notice, that there is a group of people out there, just like you, Jero Robertson, who can support each other to resist that at every cost. And I think we could link that to the DNR notices, because I think there is a lot of MPs. I think there is a lot of MPs who absolutely are concerned about the use of NDRs and during COVID-19, particularly around people with learning difficulties and assisted dying. Okay, so those are just ideas.
Thanks.
Strategically.
Right, thanks, Simone. Appreciate that and very valid points. So thank you. I'm going to ask people now, I'm afraid. You've got 15 minutes for open discussion and we've got about 10 speakers. So I'm going to have to now ask you to keep your contribution short. Otherwise, a lot more people are not going to get heard. And we need to make sure we hear from as many as possible. So Andrew Clark is next. So Andrew, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew Clark. I'm the Chair of Trustees at Buckinghamshire Disability Service. I'm going to make 4 points very quickly so that other people have a chance to get in. The first point I wanted to make was just so that we're all aware what we're up against. There is a very, very well-funded slick campaign in favour of assisted dying. We've been researching this since 2022. They probably spent maybe £5 or £6 million already. They were at all the party conferences. They're sending not just briefings but leaflets and dinner parties and all sorts of things with a lot of MPs. They've been preparing for this for this bill for a long time, and they have made considerable inroads into persuading parliamentarians, many of whom, I think the point was made later, are new to Parliament and have not really heard the other side of the argument. So I think getting into Parliament, talking to parliamentarians, talking to MPs, talking to ministers is going to be absolutely crucial, because at the end of the day, they're the people who are going to vote on the bill. And once the bill has got through second reading, that means that the principle of there being some sort of assisted dying scheme has been agreed by Parliament, and the rest is just detail. So it's really important. The second reading debate is critical that we win it if we want to make sure. As a charity, we've been campaigning on this for about 2 or 3 years now. We've done a lot of work. We've got a briefing of our own on our website. What we're now calling for is, we're trying to not take, or saying that in general we're opposed to assisted suicide. We're saying that what needs to happen next is a royal commission. There needs to be a pause, a stop, so that there's time to look at all the issues, to gather all the evidence. Simple things like how many people are actually dying in pain. We don't know. There aren't any statistics. It's just an assertion by the lobby groups. So we're asking for a royal commission, and there is precedent for that. The bill that was used to bring forward abortion in the 70s was actually paused in Parliament for more than 18 months while there was a government commission and a BMA commission that looked into the issue. So there's precedent for pausing the bill. What we would say is have a debate, don't vote, withdraw the bill, have a royal commission, come back to it when we have the royal commission. That seems to be a way that might capture a majority support. We're very happy to collaborate with anyone on our campaign. Individuals, organisations will be in touch and trying to be joined in there. Some of you may have already seen a lot of our stuff on social media. We're getting a lot of traction on social media for our arguments against assisted suicide. The trouble is, it doesn't matter. You're persuading people on social media isn't going to stop the bill. You need to persuade MPs. And so our next step is going to take our campaign off social media, but into Parliament so far as we can with the resources that we've got. And again, love to collaborate with other people on that. The other thing I just wanted to flag up quickly is we have people in the charity who have steered bills through Parliament, who've got a lot of parliamentary experience. And it's pretty much true that no private member's bill becomes law without government support. At critical points, there has to be government support to get it through. And therefore, I think, although the official position of the government is neutral, I think it's really important that we talk to ministers, and particularly the ministers that are responsible for these sorts of issues, to see what their view is. Because if they don't give positive support to the bill, it could run into the sand regardless of how much other backbench support it's got. So I think the government itself has to be a critical lobbying target.
Thank you.
That's everything from me. I will shut up now and yeah, look forward to hearing the rest of the debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. Flick, over to you.
Thank you. Many other speakers have made the points about, we all saw what happened during COVID quite adequately, so I won't say anything more about that. But as we know, MPs do respond to what's in their post bag. So as always, you know, with these campaigns around, you know, bills going through Parliament, they tend to be kind of very London centric. So you know, assaulted as we're all feeling by the fact that, you know, this is all coming together as has been mentioned previously. In York, what we've decided to do is to have an action on the 2nd of November. So we'll have had 3 days to digest whatever is in the budget, you know, none of it's going to be good. And then link that directly with the whole debate about assisted suicide, to underline the point that, yeah, fix the foundations first, in summary. And we're fortunate in that we have Rachel Maskell as MP for York Central, who is very vocally opposed to this bill. She's already been on Newsnight, and she is going to come to our action. And by doing that, we hope to get lots of media coverage and, you know, extend the debate more widely and get people writing to their MPs in opposition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark Dunk. Is Mark not here?
Oh, I am here. Sorry, Paula. I was just trying to unmute myself. Thanks. I'll try and be quick. I mean, I just think in terms of the strategy, I think the safeguarding thing is going to be a useful keystone in terms of trying to win the argument with a layer of MPs. I'm thinking one thing is to try and bring that into a real practical situation of making people think about how that safeguarding could be delivered. Because really the arguments that are going to get put up by the other side, I think, are going to be quite abstract. They're going to be, oh, we will put these safeguards in, it will be written down. We've got to remember that delivering that sort of safeguarding is going to need people to deliver it. And one thing that is widely known, even amongst all the new MPs that have come in, will be the massive understaffing in the NHS. So I think it's worth us getting some figures out about that and possibly approaching some of the health unions as well to find out if there are alliances we can make there with people who can talk about actually what the practical difficulties would be in terms of supporting people in the hospital setting where a lot of these decisions are going to get taken. Because I think that may well help us win the argument about the fact that no matter what you write into law, can that be delivered for people on the ground? And I think that might help us sway the arguments around safeguarding.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to have to ask you now to be really short if we're to get everybody in. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I've got 7 speakers. So Barb's over to you. Keep it short and to the point now, please. Sorry, but we're running out of time.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Well, yeah, a lot of points have already been covered. I come across this is a now disabled person, but a former nurse, and I've seen in hospitals, doctors have always had the upper hand. I've seen it with my own eyes, nursing patients, and also what happened to my dear father. He became disabled, and he was in hospital on the Wirral. I wanted him to be transferred to a large hospital, they're all free in Liverpool. No, I didn't have a say because my stepmother had the say. Basically, DNR, they won't transfer him, wheelchair bound. He was dead in 8 days because they put him on what was called the Liverpool pathway. They basically gave him an overdose of heroin, dimorphine. So this, to me, the safeguarding is the most important factor of this. My dad went in, a happy, joking, scouse, sense of humour man, and never came out alive. So this, and he wasn't old. He was 70 years old. That to me is 8 years away. I'll be 70. So campaigns, this previous speaker has just mentioned what I was going to say because nobody else has said it, is the health unions. I know us, a lot of us in Unite Community are all really, really strongly against this assisted suicide, as I've always called it myself. I want to do a presentation for the SHA, Socialist Health Association, who are affiliated to the Labour Party. We need to, the BMA, British Medical Association, have flip-flopped on this. They were against, and now they're not. We need to find out from, a lot of health workers and members of Unison, and say doctors in Unite, and also again lobbying MPs. We've got support in the House of Lords from Jane and Dame Tanny, but finding other allies is important, and to keep, I'll end there because it is really upsetting. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you, Babs, and thank you for your contribution. Sandra, you're next. Sandra Wyman.
Right, yes. In terms of safeguarding, just a couple of additional things that I think we can use because I find them horrific. Oregon, reduction to 48 hours from 90 hours before you make the decision, before you're, between asking and getting permission. For people, anybody who's suffered depression, and I've been bipolar since the age of 19, there will have been periods of time when you might have gone for that. And I'm very glad I didn't. I didn't have the opportunity to. Another thing in terms of the slippery slope is what's happening to children now. In the Netherlands, children are included in being able to access legalized suicide, and newborns are being euthanized as well on the basis that they may not have a life to live, which I find absolutely chilling, especially given I'm a historian. I know what happened in Nazi Germany, where in fact one of the key factors in getting people to accept euthanization of disabled people was a film that could have come from Dignity in Dying, showing about a man who was a doctor who killed his wife because she begged to be relieved of her pain. And that was used to persuade people that euthanasia was a reasonable thing to actually apply to disabled people. There was just one other thing. Oh yeah, what happened in lockdown? Also, there was a list circulated to doctors. It actually disappeared after a while, but several of us saw it together, so I know it existed, which listed lives that were least worth living and therefore might not have access to proper care, like machinery and end of life and keeping you alive care. In the case of getting COVID, at the top were anybody with a motor impairment. I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks, Sandra. Appreciate that. Right, we've got Jen, Adam, Nikki, and Dermot, and I'm going to have to ask you to really now keep it really, really short. So, Jen, over to you because we've only got 5 minutes left. So,
Hi,
Jen,
I'm Jen from Sheffield DPAC. It's so important, obviously, as we've said already, to use plain English at all times on all of our press briefings, leaflets, and on our social medias. On top of the brilliant points that Ellen Clifford made regarding including the stats for the reasons that people have stated in other countries when they have gone for assisted suicide, there are other things that we need to highlight as well. because why is safeguarding so important? We use the word safeguarding, but we don't see what we're safeguarding people actually against. And I think it's really important that we are using plain English and doing that. So just as a quick list, you know, the main thing is coercion, isn't it? So how would coercion look? Well, we've heard of, but we actually need evidence of. So if anyone's got a link, please do send it. We've heard of disabled people in Canada having doctors and nurses suggest the MAID scheme to them, which is something that shouldn't be happening. In this country, there's lack of access to NHS clinics and also meds. For example, look at the ADHD drugs that have been totally unavailable for nearly a year now, my son being one of those patients. There's a huge lack of number of SEND school places, EHCPs, and child and adolescent mental health clinics and appointments, which is a huge concern when you look that it could be extended to younger people. Coercion also is allowing a societal view that disabled people and poorly people are a burden, and allowing that view to go unchallenged, which the onus isn't only on us, but it's on everybody. Coercion is also a lack of financial support needed to access equipment and services, and coercion is also a lack of access to adequate social care. Finally, two things, it's tugging on people's heartstrings as well by reminding them of their loved ones' deaths. So often people that are for assisted suicide are saying, well, I saw my granddad or grandma, God bless them, die in terrible pain and agony, and I wouldn't want that for myself. But, you know, they have seen their loved ones die under a buckling and underfunded NHS system. And that brings us back round to fixing the foundation. So that links in really nicely. Also using high-powered, well-known celebs or supposedly well-known celebs such as Esther Rantzen as a way of leveraging the public, quite frankly, is disgraceful. And we need to prove to the MPs that the public doesn't know who Esther Rantzen is. And I'm convinced that easily can be done. For example, with small teams, getting vox pops of people, show a photo, do you know who this is? Yes or no? Easy as that. We need to educate the public on who is behind and who would potentially benefit from assisted suicide being made legal. And this is something that Buds, the gentleman from Buds, was talking about earlier. So we need more information on that as well. And then, you know, finally, when we're talking to the public, should we be spending public money and NHS appointments being taken up on causing death rather than supporting life? Because this bill passing isn't going to fix the NHS. It's only going to extend and deepen the crisis, which links us then into what Mark and others have said about linking it with medical unions and so on. But yeah, I think that 24 hours between asking for and getting permission to die will really shock a lot of people. Would you be able to organise everything to get a whole family around to say goodbye to your mum or your grandma, etc. in 24 hours? I know I wouldn't. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm really sorry for the last three speakers, Adam, Nikki and Dermot. I'm afraid we've run out of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm really sorry. What I'd suggest to all of you is you drop your comments or thoughts into the chat of the Zoom. Leave your email details in the chat. And all of you, if you wish to drop your email in the chat, please do so. This will be up on YouTube very shortly, and for you to look back as an aid over what's said and how we can campaign together. I just want to do a quick few thank yous to our awesome BSL interpreters, Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans, for interpreting the meeting today. Thank you for giving up your Sunday. To our awesome tech team, Ellen Morrison, Arjun, James, Ellen Morrison Smith. Both of them are on their short honeymoon, have given up their time this afternoon. The awesome Ellen Clifford, but also to all of you. Thank you for giving up your Sunday afternoon, for being here today. If you want the DPAC email to stay in touch and be part of this campaign, I'm just going to drop this to you now. It's mail, MAIL, @dpac.uk.net. Thank you all so much, every one of you, for participating today. And I'm very sorry that we couldn't get round to all of the questions and contributions. And I hope you forgive me after the meeting. Thanks everyone very much for your support and contributions. And that concludes our meeting today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Paula.
Thanks all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Paula.
And
Thank
a
you
wonderful
all.
day. Thank you as well. Look.
Nice to meet so many good friends here.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Missed
Thanks
you all. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. That was
Bye, everyone.
amazing.
Thanks, Paula.
No, thank you.
It's Debbie. I forgot to say medicine.
That's all right.
GCSE medicine. My partner was upstairs watching the football, and then when I asked him to come down, I knocked over a glass of water, and it all felt like chaos. So
that's all right. That's fine. Thank you. So we need to close, but thank you all for your contributions, and we're going to close the meeting now.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
I don't know
Have
how
a good
to close it.
evening.